and Private Chelsea Manning's trial. So I'll start with a little bit of background. On April 5 in 2010, a video called Collateral Murder was released by WikiLeaks. How many of you have seen this video? Okay. Would anybody be interested in describing what it is?
It's these men getting together talking as the United States helicopter's flying overhead. The people in the helicopter are saying that it looks like they have guns, when in fact they are reporters from the Associated Press or Reuters getting together and speaking to one another. And the helicopter then is ordered that they can fire at will and end up killing all these people dead. Well, in the process of this, another van comes up to get the bodies and help the people. And in this van there are children. And the helicopter's also ordered that they can shoot the van as well. And the children are also killed.
Injured.
Injured?
Seriously.
Seriously injured.
And 12 people died.
Yeah, 12 people
In
died.
that incident. All civilians. This is a direct quote from her. The most alarming aspect of the video to me was the seemingly delightful bloodlust the aerial weapons team seemed to have. They dehumanized the individuals they were engaging and seemed to not value human life, and referred to them as quote-unquote dead bastards. I hope that the public would be as alarmed as me about the conduct of the aerial weapons team. I wanted the American public to know that not everyone in Iraq and Afghanistan were targets that needed to be neutralized. So, the Collateral Murder video was released in early April 2010. On May 29, a couple months later, Manning was arrested. He was charged with leaking classified information. He went to a place in Kuwait, and they held him in a cage, a very small cage, for a period of time. Then he was taken to Quantico in Virginia and held there. He was held in Quantico in solitary confinement for 9 months in torturous conditions. So during this time, then in July and then in October, the Iraq and Afghan war logs were released. One of the most significant things about the war logs was the detailed accounts of civilian casualties. While the Bush and Obama administrations claimed to not know how many civilians were killed, the exact numbers with dates and times were there in plain sight in the logs. They could not be denied. Also, the logs held proof that the U.S. military was fully aware of torture being committed against the Iraqi insurgent forces, and they refused to investigate it. Then, in November of that year, the diplomatic cables were released. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of cables, State Department communications, were released. For example, there were cables regarding the country of Tunisia, and those cables led to the Tunisian Revolution. They were a factor in the Tunisian Revolution happening, which was the initial spark for the whole Arab Spring. So very, very influential role that these cables, and that's just one country. The cables that were released related to many countries in the world. And there's much more information available about that on the internet. So shortly after Manning is taken prisoner, he is put in solitary confinement, like I said, in Quantico, Virginia. He's kept there 9 months until enough significant pressure from protesters granted him transfer over to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. He had 22 charges against him, and including several charges of espionage. The most serious espionage charge was, quote, aiding the enemy, which carried a life sentence or possibly the death penalty. So, Manning, after being in jail 9 months, and then longer, he certainly didn't receive a speedy trial, which is due process within 120 days, which is what we require in this law, in this land. So during this time that he's being held in Fort Leavenworth, then many pretrial hearings were held. And for various reasons, the prosecution repeatedly requested that the court-martial be postponed. I remember watching, when's it going to happen, when's it going to happen? It was postponed a full year before it finally happened. The court-martial finally was scheduled for the summer of 2013, after Manning had by then been in jail for 3 full years. So this court-martial was scheduled to begin on June 3rd. As I was looking towards that happening, I arranged my life so that I could live near Fort Meade military base, which is in Maryland. I ended up living between Washington, D.C. and the military base. And I did a work trade for rent, so I wouldn't have to pay rent, and I went every day to the trial. So it was quite an adventure going to Fort Meade for me. It was an adventure in many ways. I had to teach myself how to make courtroom sketches. I had never done that before. And so I just went to the trial with my sketchbook and some pencils in the first place, and then I started seeing what some other courtroom artists had with them, so I go to the art store and get some more stuff and figure it out. But I didn't have a car, so I had to get a bike, and you can't take bikes on the train during the week, on the train that I had to take out there. So I got a folding bike, which I was allowed to take on the train. So in the morning, I'd pack up my little backpack, chock full with stuff. I'd always be amazed that the backpack didn't fall apart with how heavy it was and how much stuff was in there. And I'd ride on my backpack uphill, a lot, like 5 miles I'd ride in the morning to get to the train, then take the train to near Fort Meade, then about a half hour, 40 minutes, and then I'd ride 3 miles from the train station to the military base at security, then ride through the military base to get to the courtroom on my little folding bike with my backpack, and I tried to be professional looking every day in the courtroom. So I'd have a skirt, and a woman, a fellow activist with Code Pink, took me one day to a Goodwill, and I spent $100 and got all these different professional looking outfits for the courtroom. So it was quite an adventure, figuring out all this stuff. Sometimes I even tried biking with this big portfolio I had so that I could have like bigger sheets of paper. And it was I cracked myself up quite a lot. As I got to know people did start offering me rides. I didn't have to do this every single day, but a lot of times the supporters, they'd be late for court, they wouldn't show up at my house when they said, so I just started just going on my own most days in the morning, unless they would guarantee that they'd get me there on time. So anyway, it was fun figuring out all those logistics for sure. So once you got to the courtroom, there was an amazing amount of security. Getting into the military base randomly, they just check all your bags, that you have to empty everything out. But that didn't usually happen. What always happened every single day, getting to the courtroom, we had to go through this security trailer. And in the trailer, so I told you my backpack full. I'd have to leave all my electronics, computer, I had a portable scanner, phone, all that, and all my food left in a car. And then you go into the security, and then going through security, they'd completely take all my art supplies out, everything. They'd undo everything, and then put it all back in. And then every day we got wanded. We had to get checked completely because they did not want any recording equipment whatsoever brought into the court. So anyway, it was interesting living in this security world all summer long. So I have on the computer, when it comes up, I'll show you each day after the court proceedings. Sometimes during lunch, we would have a break at lunch. I would go directly after making the drawings, I would go out to connect to the internet, I scan my drawings, and I would send them right away to a guy named Nathan Fuller, who's a reporter with the Private Manning Support Network.